Mike, were you hoping to not be on video today?
No, no, no. I was just waiting for a formal announcement.
Mike, off the top of your head, what's your most wild issue of the week so far? What have you been dealing with?
Wow. Well, there's been a bunch of them.
Because you and I haven't talked very much this week. You've been, staying in your corner over there.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I'm knee deep in our E&O application renewals coming up. So it takes a long time to fill out that application. So it's been interesting comparing this year's numbers to last year's numbers and um, gives you a sense on the market, that's for sure.
So, Mike, tell me, what does an agent need to know about an E&O policy generally? So if they're out there talking to different brokerages and they want to know, what kind of questions do they need to ask about E&O, or do they need to ask any questions at all? What would you tell them?
I would say one, look at the limits. Two, try to get a sense on what is covered. I can tell you with our policy, it's extremely rare that we turn a claim in that isn't covered. Um, and one time it was a claim that wasn't covered, but they provided the defense and we prevailed, so it worked out fine.
When I looked at E&O
E&O,
policy
there's a lot
one,
of companies that say they have E&O policies, but what kind of policy? A cheap policy doesn't cover a lot, really does. It might hold down your fees,
yeah,
but ultimately, if you get subject to litigation, you might really regret that.
yeah. Well, and I think a good broker has used it before. I know that sounds a little silly, but if you've never had to use your E&O coverage, it's not because you're good. It's because you're lucky, and that's nice. Or it's because you're not doing a lot of deals. So, realistically, Downing Fry and some of the other big brokers here in town, you have to use your policy a couple times a year, even just to talk to an attorney. Would you say
I'll
that's
give you a I'll give you a great example, Christian. People say, "Well, I would never get sued." I mean, I do everything by the book. I had an agent one time that got sued because she didn't return a phone call. Now, think about that one. That was the case. Didn't return a phone call. So they can sue you for anything. That's what your dad used to tell me, and I now buy into that thinking. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of claims, but when we do have a claim, the agent's thankful that we have E&O insurance in place.
so I looked at this recently for a couple of agents. There's a lot of agents that they'll start an LLC or a corporation. In Florida, we have what's called a professional association or a PA that realtors can set up to hold their license. Mike, I would say a lot of your agents use this format, but they asked, do I need to do it? And I'm a little conflicted. I don't think you do. So if we think about how corporations or entities protect us, number one, they're helpful if you're on a big team. And so let's say you're on a big team or you own a big team of agents and you have people that work for you that might be doing stuff and maybe they get themselves in trouble. Okay, maybe setting up an entity makes sense for you because you've got to protect yourself against your own agents and your own employees. But if it's just you, and most of my agents and most of the people on this call, it's just you. So if something were to happen, if you're out showing a property and you fall, or one of the clients falls, or you get into an argument, or you get into a car accident, um, generally you're responsible because it was you. You're personally there. So whether you're doing it as a real estate agent or you're just doing it as a person on the street, they're going to hold you personally responsible. So that's the first thing that I want people to know is because it's you, you're going to have some responsibility. And that's how it works with me. So if I do something as an attorney, I'm going to have personal liability because I did it. In addition to the law firm that I own or the title company that I own or the employees, who knows, what other liabilities there might be. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you're going to have, if it's a car insurance thing, you're going to have car insurance. So make sure you have good insurance for your car. Make sure you also understand what your E&O policy at the brokerage covers. So Mike, on your policy and a lot of the policies in town, it covers real estate related activities. So anything regarding listings, putting contracts together, doing a broker opinion of value, giving advice on a home sale or drafting an amendment or something, like you're generally protected on those things. Now, your insurance policy has certain carve-outs. So, for example, Mike, you mentioned that there are certain things the insurance company doesn't cover, but they will provide defense. So, fraud is one of those things. If you're accused of fraud, the E&O insurance typically will give you an attorney, will pay for an attorney to represent you, to defend you. Now, if you're found guilty, they're not on the hook. They're not going to pay out on a fraud claim, but they did provide you the defense. And so those are some of those carve outs. So I always think, what is the PA for? What is the corporation going to do to give you additional protection? Maybe if you have certain assets you're trying to protect but can't under those other policies. I don't know. It would be tough. In Florida, we're very lucky. We have homestead laws. So, Mike, you have your primary home is protected from creditors generally. So your home is off limits. Retirement accounts are generally off limits. IRAs, 401ks, pensions are off limits. So we're thinking about, all right, what's the money in my company bank account or my real estate bank account? What's the money in my home bank account? Any investments beyond retirement? My car has car insurance. My any real estate related has E&O insurance. I don't know what additional coverage a PA or a corporation provides you. I haven't figured that out yet. Maybe another attorney can explain that. I do believe we had an accountant on here a couple of months ago, and she basically said that you don't need to set up a corporation or an LLC in order to take certain tax write-offs. You can take those just as an individual. So it's not that. So why do you need the PA? I don't know if you do. Maybe it makes you feel better. Maybe it's a security blanket and it helps you sleep well at night. Maybe it looks more professional, so you want to do it for that reason. I just don't know if there's a lot of value beyond that. So
I
I
think
love
it
to
boils
learn.
down to
If
your
I
comfort
change my
level.
mind, I'll let you know, Mike.
Yeah, my house, originally I was not in a flood zone. I think I now am. But even though I wasn't in a flood zone, I still got a flood policy because my comfort level was if we had one of those 200-year storms or whatever, I didn't want to have to worry about not having flood coverage. And it's fairly cheap if you're not in a flood zone. So it's what your comfort level dictates, I
It's
guess.
what your comfort level dictates, Mike. You're a pretty conservative person. You don't want to take the risk if you don't have to, if you think it gives you some protection. Vicky makes a funny comment. I thought PA made consumers think I might be smarter than I am. There's always a little bit of truth in every joke. I like that one, Vicky. That's great. Okay, so hopefully that's helpful to you guys. I wouldn't rush into anything like that unless we can detail a specific liability or protection that you need that PA or corporation could help you with. If we can nail it and say, all right, that's why we're doing it, then let's do it. Call me. I'd be happy to help you with that. But a lot of times I talk myself out of that kind of business because I don't want to do something that's not necessary. Speaking of which, you know what is necessary, Mike? Going under
Sales
contract.
contracts.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect. All right. So everyone on this video understands I'm the biggest proponent of as is contracts. And that being said, the standard contracts are still the majority, at least here in Collier County. So we typically use these NABOR contracts. NABOR has at least two that are prevalent. You've got your as-is contract and you have your standard contract. Now, there are two benefits to a standard contract. Number one, it's got the best name. It's the standard contract. It's going to give your client the most confidence. It's one of those things you don't really have to explain. It's the standard. Sounds pretty good. So it's got that going for it. Number two, um, it limits the reasons a buyer can terminate the deal. Now, obviously, that depends on where your motivations are, but as a seller, that sounds pretty good. The buyer can only terminate if I refuse to fix certain defects. Everything else on the contract is the exact same as the as-is contract. The only difference between the two is inspections. So on the as-is contract, the buyer can terminate for any reason, sole discretion. The inspection language is about, a paragraph or two long. It's really not much. And on the standard contract, it's about 2 pages long. That's why I don't like the standard contract. I think it's too complex. You've got way too many if-thens, and you got to explain it all. Well, if you don't want to explain it all, just show your client this video, right? Show the client this video, tell them, hey, spend the next 20 minutes, 30 minutes reviewing this with Christian, and then call me and let's go over it. So that sound all right, Mike? Call me. I'll do it.
Makes sense.
All right, so here we go. I'm going to share my screen. If anyone has questions, please, raise your hand, speak out, guide me in the right direction. One of those people that did that right before this call, Lisa, thank you. She actually asked me to go over this first page because she sees a lot of times where we're kind of putting things in the wrong place. And she's talking about line 1 all the way to line 20. And this is the fixtures. So this first part is the fixtures. So think shutters, pool equipment, lighting, audio visual, solar panels, things that are affixed to the house. Importantly, TVs are not on here. So if you want TVs, you'd have to add it. It's just not on here as it is. The next thing on here is personal property. And so here we've got refrigerators, stoves, dishwashers, microwaves, washing machines, and dryers. Importantly, we did a video last week on washers and dryers. FarBar doesn't have that in their personal property list. NABOR does. So if you're going between NABOR and FarBar, just keep that in mind. Washer dryer has to be added if it's FarBar. Window treatments, garage door openers, remotes, access codes, keys, fobs, other devices, pool or solar cover. So think of it a cover for your pool. It's not affixed to anything. It's, you store it away when you're not using it. So we have to add that back in because it really does go with the house. That's kind of what NABOR was thinking on this. And so you would put anything else after here. So line 14, 15, 16, I want you to add everything else. And this is where we start getting into, well, how do I write that? We'll get that in just a second. Lastly, the following items are excluded. So it's line 18. Here are the things that are specifically not going to be with the property. All right, Lisa says, would you please discuss how you would indicate turnkey furnished and when you might use a personal property agreement? Thank you, Lisa. Beautiful. All right, so I think this is important. This is really the key. I've had too many deals get really complicated really quickly because of personal property. It is a thorn in my side, and I have PTSD. I will admit it. Yesterday, I spent, I don't know, a good 10 hours fighting about linens. Mike, where were you yesterday? You could have helped me.
No, I wanted to stay away from that one.
So I'll tell you the quick story on this. We put in a bunch of stuff on this first page. We put and I told the buyer, put more, not less. Let's add more things. Let's add more things. What else is there? What's most relevant? He's like, this. And one of those things was linens. Linens was included. Well, we also talked about, they'll do a full inventory list during, prior to the end of due diligence. Great, perfect. So it's like they didn't want to put all the effort in. They didn't have the full inventory list, but it's like everything goes, excluding a few things. And so we put a bunch of things. We put linens, we put TVs, couches, decorations, furniture, kitchen table, kitchen accessories, all that. Well, we get the inventory list yesterday, and the linens aren't on there. And so I just say, hey, what about the linens? My buyer wants those. And they said, no, they're not included. Well, that's what the contract says. Now, if we hadn't put linens, I think the seller could have made a really good argument. Yeah, that wasn't included. And I don't know, probably would have lost our argument because how much can I really fight over bed linens? It just makes it really hard. But it was on the contract, which saved our butt because that was the thing my buyer was really focused on in that moment. Now, very silly, and I told the buyer, said, are we really going to fight about linens? And he's like, yeah, we really are. So you can't predict what's going to be important, but what you can do is spend a lot of time on the front end detailing what's important and having the discussion with your buyer and say, look, if we don't put the effort in now, it could mean we lose it later. And are you okay with that? And a buyer might be okay with that. So Lisa, Mike, do you watch football?
Um, According to my wife, too much.
Okay, you're a Commanders fan, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Commanders? No, don't answer that. All right. So I like to think about the quarterback who has a clock in his head. Mike, do you know what that means when the quarterback has a clock in their head?
Oh yeah.
So basically they're counting down. They can't see everybody around them. They're wearing that big helmet, but they know that if they don't get the ball out of their hand, if they don't throw it or hand it off within a certain time, they're probably going to get tackled. So just instinctually, they know I'm out of time. If I hold on to the ball any longer, I'm gonna get tackled. And I think everyone in a real estate transaction has to have a clock in their head for the same reason. So Lisa and I talked about this earlier. There's a right way to do this, and then there's a good enough way to do this, and then there's a wrong way to do it. And you have to know which one you're at based on the clock in your head. If it's wrong, you got to scramble, maybe you get sacked, right? If it's wrong, and we've got to fix it. So if you don't have everything you need in there, if you're not clear, if it's too vague, you got to spend a little more time on it. But if it's good enough, if you put the personal property items in lines 9, 10, and 11, like the furniture and rugs and linens, if you put it there, it's probably fine. Just get the ball out of your hand. Just throw it. Go for it. Just throw it. I don't really care because I don't want to frustrate the buyer. I don't want to frustrate the seller. I don't want to keep you up all night to change it to go from lines 9 and 10 to lines 14 and 15. I don't think it's relevant. But if you have the time, if you just, if no one's coming at you, and we'll do this over the next day or so, we'll get it right, and we're all on the same page. Great. Maybe you even save it for the next amendment. You say, all right, I'm going to put this in my mind. When we do an amendment at the end of inspection period, I'll just make sure that we address this and we make it right. Think of the clock. When you think of me, think of the clock. Um, Lisa says, as a buyer, would you always ask for personal property inventory in the addendum section if the property is being sold turnkey? So it depends. Again, it's the clock. I would say in the minimum, I want you to define what turnkey means to you. So you can use the word turnkey. You can say property sold turnkey, including but not limited to, and I want you to list out as many things that are relevant. And here are the things that are usually relevant: furniture, decorations, rugs, televisions, kitchen accessories and utensils, bed utensil or bed linens, bed towels, things. think about what's important and put it on there, including but not limited to, and list it out. What does turnkey mean to you? Now, MLS has a glossary for what turnkey means. It essentially means it's move-in ready. But move-in ready may not mean that the mixer is staying. Some people don't have a kitchen mixer. So if that's really important to you, I want you to specify what that means. Having two sets of utensils or just one. Turnkey probably isn't good enough for us unless we're all about to get sacked and you need to just get the ball out of your hand. That makes sense, Mike? Do you like my analogy?
Yeah, no, I like it. You know, the number one battle we get involved in this area, Christian, is,
You're not much of a fighter, Mike. Are you a battler?
well, the battle that I see more than I'd like to see is chandelier. Because the seller, if they really put a lot of money into their chandelier, they want to take it with them. And yet I notice in the wording there it says attached lighting. So yeah, that seems to pop up more than you'd believe.
It does. So I think that's on the listing agent to sit with the seller and say, of everything here, what do we need to take with us? Now, I got a call from one of your agents yesterday, Mike. It was actually funny. He joked. He called me in the morning and said, Christian, I'm just going to ask one question. I'll bother you later if I have others. And I'm like, ah ha ha, okay. And then he called me four more times yesterday. So I'm true to my word. I'm just going to bug you over time. So he was getting a listing together, and the seller was ready and just wanted to get it out there. But there were some exclusions. It was being sold turnkey with some exclusions. He's like, what do I need for the listing? And I said, if you really need to get this out, I'm not that worried about the listing agreement having all the exclusions. I'm just not. Just put something generally, seller to provide a list of exclusions within 7 days or something. We're just trying to get the ball out of our hand. We see an opening, we want you to go for it. And remind the seller, hey, we have to make sure that this stuff gets added when we do go under contract. That's the important part. So that's the guy coming up the front. I know I'm going to get hit. The sales contract is the important part. Listing agreement, I'm not that worried about. Get the ball moving. Let's keep going. Um, Vicky says, I always have my listing client replace lighting if they plan to take it. So much easier than excluding. I couldn't agree more with you. Excluding is really clunky. If you're going to be doing that work to change it out, do it now. The chandelier is a fixture. It's a fix to the home. It really should stay unless you remove it before. You don't want it in the listing pictures. You don't want it to be something that the buyer gets attached to. So remove it ahead of time. Vicky, I had once where the seller was removing the front door. It was an antique door. It was like a family heirloom, and the buyer got really upset because it wasn't in the contract to be removed. So that ended up being a thing, and don't let that happen. That's just crazy.
Maybe one of the logical questions they ask the seller is there anything here that has sentimental value, something that's been passed down through the family,
Ooh.
whatever, that should be excluded? At least get them thinking about it.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of questions here. Can we submit photos that specifies turnkeys? I'd hate to have to word it so frequently if I don't have to. Again, it's the clock. Photos are great. If that saves you from having to write out a huge inventory list, I think that's really helpful. This is where I might even use AI. NABOR has a list, an inventory list, where they can go down and check and will jog people's memories. Um, I would give them the list and then have them return it to you. I usually tell my sellers, I'm going to give you a little bit of homework. Go ahead, take a couple of days. Ask me if you have questions, but do your best, fill it out. Now, if the seller really refuses, then you really do want to take those photos and get something. And then you want to sit with the seller and say, all right, I took all these photos. What is going? What is not? It's it's really very important. And not every buyer is too picky. There are some buyers, me included, I don't really care. If you told me I need to take a washing machine, fine. as long as I'm getting a good deal and I'm happy with the transaction, the seller's being reasonable, yeah, you want the washing machine, fine. But I'm not your typical buyer. We all have dealt with the typical buyer. Sigrid has a great suggestion. I have sellers put stickers on items that they will not include in the inventory list. Take photos of it and tell the buyer agent upfront what's excluded. That sounds great. My 6-year-old daughter would love the sticker idea. She'd go around putting stickers on everything. That'd be awesome. All right, so now let's go back to the contract here. Those are all great suggestions. I think my big point is just make sure you have that discussion because I don't want that to be an issue later. And if it has to be something that you're more vague about, just disclose that. Hey, look, we didn't get into detail on this stuff. Just realize it can get a little hairy. So the rest of this is going to be a general NABOR review, and then we'll get to the inspections as well. Mike, do you like putting a deadline on a contract?
That can be a real deal breaker, to be honest. I mean, if you're representing a buyer and you're anxious, you want a real tight deadline, but that could be exactly the wrong move. You
Yeah,
know,
it can be. So, strategy wise, you have to think about the pros and cons of putting a deadline on your offer. Personally, I don't put deadlines in the contract itself. I leave this part blank. And then in my email, I'll say, let's say it's Friday. Say, we would like to have an answer no later than Sunday night. I think that's reasonable. I like putting in the email. And then in that scenario, if the seller signed it on Monday, we still have a deal, right? The contract isn't expired unless I send an email saying, hey, we're revoking our offer and we're not moving forward. The good thing with NABOR is that if you haven't made your deposit, there are no damages, there are no remedies. Mike, you said earlier, anyone can get sued for anything, but the contract says the seller or the buyer's only liability is the deposits made. That's a very important thing when you're thinking about deadlines. There's no real risk on not putting a deadline, even if the seller were to accept your offer later.
on
Closing,
that, effective date as far as getting back to them, the thing that buyers have to remember or keep in mind is that the listing agent sometimes can't reach the seller right away because a lot
right,
of these sellers are out of town or traveling, particularly in the summer months. So
yeah.
there's sometimes good reasons why they can't get back in time.
Right, exactly. I would say it's all about your style and realizing that putting a deadline, does it match your style and what the buyer is wanting? Does it fit kind of the strategy overall? All right, well, let's keep going. Closing date. A lot of people put on or before certain closing dates, and it has no legal basis, I'll tell you. It doesn't help or hurt your client to put on or before, because at the end of the day, everyone would have to agree on if we're going to close early. So buyer and seller. Just putting on or before, it doesn't actually have any legal change to our contract. So take that as you will. Cash financing. We talked about the mortgage contingency on the far bar last week, and it's really brutal. It's a take it or leave it type of contingency. But NABOR is a lot more loosey-goosey. It basically says if if the 30 days or whatever time period after that date, which is right here, line 68, either seller or buyer may terminate this contract at any time. Buyer's termination under this contingency must accompanied by a statement of, adverse credit, other evidence that they were denied. The only thing that changes after that loan date, that contingency date, the only thing that changes is that the seller has the right to terminate the contract, and which point the buyer would get their money back. So let's say you have your 30 or 45-day loan contingency, and on day 50, the seller gets a better offer. They could terminate the buyer's offer, this contract that's been under contract for 50 days. They could terminate it because the buyer didn't waive their financing contingency. That's the downside. That's the risk. We don't see that very often. So I think it's a very low risk, but it's the risk. So if a buyer wants to keep the loan contingency and doesn't want to waive it, They just have to understand that part of it. But this is a very simple loan contingency. What is this? It's one long paragraph. FAR it's like 8 sections. It's really extreme, the difference. Otherwise, if it's a cash deal, I always like this. It says cash slash financing without contingency. So the buyer can get a loan, they can get an appraisal, they can do all those things. Um, but there's no contingency for it. If they got denied, they don't get to terminate and get their money back. Keep going down. They changed the NABOR liens and special assessments section pretty drastically last year. So number one, this is about liens. So seller shall pay the full amount of any association special assessments or government imposed liens or special assessments. So this is any assessments which on or before the effective date are a lien against the property. So if the assessment was passed prior to going under contract, seller shall pay full amount. So that's the first rule. If it was passed before you went under contract, the seller pays that assessment. So this could be an HOA assessment for a golf course. It could be a Bonita Springs water assessment, special assessment, or City of Marco Island sewer assessment. The seller shall pay, unless, notwithstanding the above, if a special assessment is levied as of the effective date and may be paid in installments, meaning like monthly or quarterly or annually, then you get to check who's going to pay for it, seller or buyer. So yes, it was passed prior to going under contract, but it's an annual payment for the next 10 years. Here's my advice. If the seller discloses it, you should be able to select buyer. So, hey, buyer, I'm paying $500 a year for the sewer assessment. You're going to take that over after closing. Maybe the buyer could negotiate. They could say, no, 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 I just want you to pay it at closing. I'm paying you full price, or I'm giving you what you want. Otherwise, you just clean that up. I don't want to pay it going forward. That's fine. But I think the seller could also similarly argue, I'm disclosing it. This is part of the deal. It's in MLS. This is what I want. You're not giving me a great offer, whatever it is. And that in that scenario, the buyer is going to be paying it. What I think is funny, Mike, is when sellers say, I'm not paying it. We have to check buyer. We have to check buyer. And they're like, well, there are no disclosed assessments. Have you ever seen that, Mike, where the seller is just mandating buyer has to pay. Check the box for buyer, check, but we haven't actually told the buyer that there is a special assessment. Have you heard about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I see a lot of wild stuff in this area.
Yeah, so I had a client recently, they were just, the seller was just adamant that nope, we have to check buyer. And I called the seller and I said, but you don't know of any, which means you haven't told the buyer of any. Why would it's not fair that the buyer should have to pay something that you didn't disclose? So, I mean, in that scenario, I think we ended up just picking seller. I think that's how it worked out. But if the seller was adamant, then maybe we put some language in the other terms and conditions saying if a special assessment exists that's paid installments, buyer has the right to terminate within 48 hours of notice. Or use an as-is contract and find out during your inspection period. That's why I like the as-is. Now, finally, so the number one rule is the seller pays it if it's before closing. And then the second part, the buyer pays it for everything after the contract. So if it was passed before the contract, the seller pays it. If it was after the contract, the buyer pays it unless it exceeds 1% of the purchase price. It's exhausting. It's all there. It's a little confusing. I think the most important thing is there an assessment? And if there is, let's spend some time on it. We did talk over the last 2 weeks, Mike. I think we did our leasing example, and this is where you would check the box to disclose that there's a lease in place. And then finally, you've got your inspection clause. This is the first part. So there are inspections, or the buyer waives inspections altogether. Very rarely do we see a buyer waiving inspections altogether. That is not the norm. So if we keep going through the NABOR contract, it requires marketable title, which is the best you can get. Has, all the marketable, the title stuff that we're just not going to spend a lot of time on. It provides for survey objections, which if there is a survey objection, so the buyer gets a survey, we find out that there was something wrong, it then rolls into the title objection. So keep going down. We've got our general seller disclosures. So I always like this one. I think this one's kind of fun. Seller does not know of any improvements to the property which were made without proper permits or COs slash substantial completion, or of any existing violations of local ordinances or codes, or any pending code enforcement violations or proceedings affecting the property. So a lot of people focus on this language to say the seller has to close permits. It's not really what it says. It says that the seller isn't aware of any improvements that were made without permits, or, that they were closed properly. So this isn't really good enough if I'm a buyer. You still want to protect yourself by researching if there are permits and mandating that the seller close them out. And we'll get to that in just a second.
Christian, I've got to give one of your employees credit. My daughter found that I had an open permit from 24 years ago.
Yeah, what was it for, Mike?
We had put in a security system, and apparently they never closed it out. And obviously, the company's out of business. So that was interesting. But your
What
your,
did you end
your
up doing?
staff
Did you
person
go down to
there
the county?
saved me.
Did you go down to the county to close it, or is it still open?
Yeah, no, it's closed now. But that does surprise me. I mean, I got to
Yeah.
admit, in the back of my mind, I always wondered, is it possible through the years that someone forgot to close one out? So I'm glad that she researched that.
Well, it's a good example as I think a good listing agent would do a permit search prior to taking on the listing or prior to going live so that you're not under the gun to get this closed out. The reality is, if there's an open permit, the buyer's going to ask you to close it. And that's just, the unfortunate part of this business. We have to deal with permits. It's such a pain. So do the work ahead of time. Don't be under a time crunch, especially if the listing is going to be live for a couple of months. Do it now. Do it now. Um, let's keep going. Try not to drag too much for you. This is the important part, the inspections. And so it starts on line 242. It goes and it goes all the way to 349. Ugh, what a pain. I don't like the standard contract because I have to spend two whole pages, over 100 lines of words to explain what protections the buyer has and what rights the seller has and what happens if they go sideways. So let me try and give you the quick and easy version of this. Number one, you have to explain this to your clients before they sign it. There's really no other way to do this without spending a significant amount of time on this part. There just isn't. So, number one, buyer has a time to do an inspection. They can look at appliances and equipment, including fire sprinklers, irrigation, wells, septic, everything. We call it systems and equipment. So, look at all the stuff. Number two, you can review for radon gas. Interestingly, FARBAR doesn't have radon gas as an inspection item. Three, lead-based paint. Four, termites, wood-destroying organisms. Five, mold. We did a video with John Kuntz from All Dry. I think it's Southwest Florida All Dry. He's excellent. That video was a lot of fun. Go look at that one. And then the existence of any open permits. So those are six inspection items that a buyer has the right to review. All inspections shall be non-invasive, shall not entail any perforation or removal of structural material. So it's kind of like a surface level inspection. Upon reasonable notice, seller shall provide access. Buyer will indemnify and hold seller harmless if there's any damages. Good. All right. Buyer can do inspections. That's the easy part. And then what happens if we find something? Well, now It has to actually be a defect, except as to any defective inspection items disclosed to or acknowledged by buyer prior to buyer's execution of any offer. So unless the seller disclosed it to the buyer ahead of time, if any inspection conducted during the inspection period reveals the following, defective inspection items. This is what I want the buyer and the seller to spend some time on. So any systems and equipments that aren't working, the presence of radon at or above the EPA action levels, the presence of lead-based paint, the existence of termites, and the presence of toxic molds. And then this is interesting, penicillin aspergillus and other allergenic molds exceeding the levels of such molds measured upon the exterior of the dwelling shall not be deemed a defective inspection item for purposes of this contract. So the allergenic molds, not defective, just not. And that's not in FAR either, by the way. FAR doesn't have mold as a defect. And then 6, any open permits, void, expired, issued, opened, or under review. Those are defective items. If you found one of those, you can ask for the seller to fix it. The seller can say yes, or they can say no. If they say no, the buyer has the right to terminate, but not until then. And what we see a lot of times is that the buyer sees something, it freaks them out, and they just want to terminate. Can't do that. You have to make your election. You just have to. Interestingly, we keep going. This is where it gets a little more confusing. If buyer elects recourse from seller for any defective items, buyer shall, not later than 5 days after the inspection period, notify the seller of the inspection items. Let's see, furnish the seller a complete copy of the report, and then notify the seller of their election to either have the buyer fix it or have the seller fix it or get a credit. There's so many traps on this contract. If buyer elects to receive a credit, the amount of the credit shall be stated at the time of the buyer's election and be equivalent to the estimated cost of the remedial action as evidenced by written estimates. You have to have invoices. So Mike, generally, my advice is if you are using this contract and there are things you want fixed, but you'd rather a credit, you still have to ask for them to be fixed. So ask for them to be fixed and then call the listing agent to try to negotiate a credit. Because otherwise you need an invoice. Have I told you that part of it, Mike?
Oh, yeah. Hey, one of the questions we get a lot, Christian, is with respect to the inspection and the days they have to make the inspection or get that done. What's the first day? Is it the day the contract is signed, or is it the very next day?
So the day you sign the contract is day 0. But you're under contract. If the seller gives you permission to go do inspections on day 0, yeah, you can do that. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, no, a lot of people, they're calculating the number of days and they don't know whether the day it's signed is day 1 or the next day is day 1. I get that question quite often.
Yeah, the day you sign is day 0. And then the next day is day 1. And if you think about it, a full day is 24 hours. So if we're signing it on Sunday, it's really, we haven't gone a full 24 hours until Monday. So Monday is day 1. The day you sign is always day 0. Now, the other tricky part is any deadline that ends on a weekend or a holiday goes to the next business day. So if we signed a contract and inspection period ends Saturday, it actually doesn't. It rolls to Monday. And then you have 5 days to do your buyer election. So Monday is day 0 of the buyer election, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday again, which means it rolls to Monday again. So a 15-day inspection could be 17 days because it landed on a Saturday and then moved to Monday. So now it's 17 days. And then the 5-day election, it should have been 5 days, but it actually is 7 because it ended on another Saturday and rolled to the Monday. So what's that? 17 plus 7? That's 24 days under inspection period. That's crazy. I really don't like this contract. And then, Mike, do you remember How many days does the seller have to respond to a buyer election?
Wow.
10 days. There it is. It's right there, Mike. I saved
I was
it.
going to guess wrong. I was remembering the number five, so I always have to pull it out and look at it.
So we have 10 days to respond to a buyer election. In the meantime, you know what happens? That second deposit is due. I have a contract on my desk. The buyer refuses to make his second deposit until he hears from the seller. Ugh, gross. On an as-is contract, by the way, I like doing one deposit, not two, because it's really not necessary to do two. So the seller can respond, and they can either say yes to buyer's elections, they can counter with something else, or they can reject it. They can say no. So if we compare that to FAR in the FAR standard, the seller can't say no. But
Nice
in the
odds.
NABOR standard, they can. The NABOR standard, the seller can say no. If they thought the buyer got a great deal and they're just nitpicking and even if they really are defective items, the seller can still say no. Now the what happens there, if the seller says no, is the buyer has the right to terminate. They may not. The buyer could say, well, I still want it. I think that's great. I think that's great. The only thing that's different with the as is and the standard is that it limits the reasons a buyer can terminate while still giving the seller the same rights. So for the seller, it doesn't matter. To me, I think you have to find what works best for you. Now, here are a couple other points. There's probably a lot of things that I'm missing on this contract. Number one, if you don't finish the repairs, let's say you agree but don't finish them, 200% escrow or credit. So if you can't do a credit, then it's going to be an escrow, 200%. So for example, they were supposed to fix the roof. It was $2,600. The guy never made it out. You still close. You can either take a $2,600 credit and the buyer will hire the roofer, or you put 5,200 in escrow. And when the roof is fixed, that money gets released back to the seller. They have a whole list here of what's not defective. Again, I would have your buyer and your seller look at this and say, here are the things that are not defects, especially allergenic molds. And then here's the last one I want to really point to, Mike. Line 327. I don't think a lot of people know about this line. No cost to repair or replace any systems and equipment item shall exceed the fair market value of that item if it were in working condition. No cost to repair or replace any systems and equipment item shall exceed the fair market value of that item if it were in working condition. Which means if you have a 15-year-old water heater and it doesn't work, the seller doesn't have to replace the water heater. Their limit is the fair market value of that item if it were working. What is a 15-year-old water heater worth? Not very much. Not very much. The seller is not obligated to do a whole new water heater. Now, from a buyer's perspective, that might be considered very unfair because why do I have to put on a new water heater when the seller never told me it was broken? As is contract would protect a buyer in this case. Or if you just wanted a new water heater, if you're doing your initial walkthrough to see the place and you're like, man, that's an old water heater. We need to ask the seller to replace it. Just put it in the contract. Other terms and conditions, right before you go under contract, you have it included and you say, seller shall replace the water heater prior to closing. That makes sense, right, Mike?
Yep.
You know what else I like doing with that? And I'm going to go to the other terms and conditions. If there's something you know you need, put it there. Do it ahead of time. I like putting permits in there. So I don't really want to wait to tell my seller to close all the permits. I want to put it in my initial offer. Seller shall close all open or expired permits prior to closing. I'm going to put it in the offer. I don't need to do it on my inspection anymore because I just put it in there anyways. So put that, the water heater example is a great one. Anything else that you think needs to be addressed. Seller shall give buyer a credit for the roof. whatever it may be. If you, let's say it was under contract previously, and you know that it fell apart because of a roof or because of a water heater or whatever it may be, put that in there. Either buyers taking it subject to the, non-working water heater, or seller shall replace the non-working water heater. Um, After that, you've got, this again, this is NABOR, so it's going to work the same as the as-is contract. If it's a condo, do a condo. Put the addendum. Now, I believe you should be using an as-is contract with a condominium. Mike, do you remember why?
Why?
Condo review period.
That's right.
So how the condo review period is 7 business days. So the buyer can get out for any reason anyways. So if they have 7 business days to get out under the condo review period, then just match it up with a 7 or a 10 day inspection period on an as is, and don't spend all that time, all that effort trying to explain cosmetic versus defective. Just say no. Just say no. Kim asks, is the as is 7 day inspection deadline on a Saturday if it lands on a Saturday? No. Under NABOR, any deadline that ends on a weekend or holiday goes to the next business day. So even on an as-is contract, it's going to roll forward to that next Monday or Tuesday or whatever the next business day is. Um, Someone else asked, how would I do a permit search? It depends on where the property is located. Collier County has a portal that you can log into. You don't even need a username. You just need to put in the security protocol, and you can search for all the permits. City of Marco has a portal as well that you don't need to log into. I believe Lee County and some of the other cities, maybe even City of Naples, you have to create an account, but you can create an account and search permits. Or call my office. We'll look. We really will. And no charge. If you have a question, you say, hey, can you look to see if there are any permits on this property? Be happy to help. Happy to. Mike, this one ran a little longer because it's a big contract, but generally, any thoughts? Any pushback on me?
No, actually, this is something that people need to look at and go over almost every year because it's reminders. It jars your thinking and very informative. Well done, Christian. I mean, really, I learned quite a bit today.
Good. I'm glad. I think that I wish the as is was our standard, but until then, a lot of people are going to use this contract. It's a great contract generally. I just have a preference. And I'm sure you do too. I think every agent has their own preference. And if you think that it's important to keep a buyer genuinely in a deal, and limit their ability to get out for, non-important things, the standard does that. It attempts to do that. But there's some landmines. There's some landmines, and people hold their cards very close to their chest if they know they're so tightly governed. So just be careful. Try and match the contract to your personality and how you want the deal to work. I think my personality is I want I want people to get what they deserve. I want the buyer to have a free look, and if it's a great property, I want the seller to get paid. It's really that simple. So, Mike, thank you.
Good
Everybody, I
job.
wish you luck. Gear up for season because I think it's going to come this year. I think we're going to have a good season, Mike. All right.
It's feeling that way, to be honest.
As my buddy Scott would say, own your day. Bye, guys.